This is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners in cooperation with Prophecy DeFi. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with co-host Andrew Young, dialing in from beautiful New Brunswick, Canada. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm just in Toronto, my usual Toronto.
Yeah, it looks like the usual background.
Exactly. Not as nice as Nova Scotia, and not nearly as good of fishing either.
Yeah,
so.
Not as nice as Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, which is where I am.
Oh, sorry, New Brunswick.
Inside, looks like I'm inside of a sauna for the people who are watching on YouTube. All right, Andrew, let's jump right into it. There's a couple of sort of big stories that are going on this week. One is a story that's been going on really for a year, and some might say, basically 7 years since Ethereum was invented, and that's the merge. We've talked before on this podcast about how the merge has surprisingly become kind of clear in focus, and there have been some major milestones hit with some of these test nets. We've seen more and more ETH stake to the beacon chain, which suggests people do think that this conversion is going to happen. And then there's some news this week that options volume around ETH has actually surpassed Bitcoin for the first time in history as people are trying to position themselves around this. So the merge is definitely a hot topic, and I want to get to it. But the big news today is actually this Nomad bridge hack. So for, our audience kind of runs the gamut. I know there's some people who are not, super duper into the crypto weeds here, but basically there are these things called bridges, and they connect different blockchains, and they seem to get exploited a lot. And it seems like maybe they're sort of inherently flawed. Can you just walk us through what exactly happened with Nomad and talk a little bit about what's a bridge? What's the problem it's trying to solve for? Is it a solution that's viable? What are the other solutions that are out there? Just help us make sense of all of this stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. So cross-chain bridges essentially allow users to send and receive tokens between different blockchains. And the key thing is for non-native assets. So for example, if you're Polygon and you want users to be able to use USDC, for example, which for the most part, USDC lives on Ethereum, then you need some sort of way essentially bridging USDC, which is a stable coin, onto Matic, if it's not a native asset. And so bridges essentially allow you to do that. And the way they typically work is you lock up tokens. So if you're sending USDC from Ethereum to Matic, you would lock up the tokens, the bridges lock up the tokens in a smart contract on Ethereum, the USDC, and then essentially reissue new USDC tokens on Matic. But the problem is that if the smart contract on Ethereum, i.e. like the home chain, gets hacked, then, and typically what happens is the hacker hacks that contract, takes all the tokens. The tokens on Matic, the chain that they were bridged onto, are no longer backed by anything. So they're effectively worthless. And so that's essentially what happens in these bridge hacks is people hack the smart contract on the home chain, take all the tokens. And so the tokens on Matic actually still exist. They're just no longer backed by anything.
Is that similar to like the wrapped concept, the idea of like wrapped ETH, wrapped Bitcoin? I think, that was a topic that was in the news recently with the blow up of 3AC, the idea that you got some sort of like mirror of a token and its value theoretically should be tied to that, but can separate or decouple, in this case, I guess, because of a hack. Are those the same things?
Yeah, exactly. So wrapped Bitcoin really is just effectively, because obviously Bitcoin isn't native to Ethereum. It's native to the Bitcoin network. So wrapped Bitcoin is essentially just Bitcoin that's been quote unquote bridged onto Ethereum. And usually it's actually custodial. So instead of actually having a smart contract, you'll have just like a centralized operator that essentially just takes custody of the Bitcoin, and then they effectively issue it on Ethereum. And so if they were to get hacked, for example, then that would be like the equivalent of the wrapped Bitcoin getting hacked.
Like, I'm curious, do you know how much of the value that's bridged is held in a smart contract that's on chain versus, say, like a centralized party? Is there data on that?
So wrapped Bitcoin, WBTC, is $5.4 billion. So, and BTC right now, obviously it's come down a little bit. It's about 500 billion. So roughly 1% of Bitcoin is now wrapped.
Yeah. But I thought you said that they're held by centralized, like custodial, like players. The collateral, I mean, is that the case for wrapped Bitcoin?
Yes, I believe that is the case. I actually haven't used wrapped Bitcoin too much myself. So let me just take a look, but
Yeah.
I'll get a more definitive answer on that.
Yeah. Well, while you're looking at it, I mean, I think we've talked before about smart contract risk and how, in traditional finance, there's a counterparty risk with the bank or financial institution. And in DeFi, there maybe isn't counterparty risk, but there's smart contract risk. And we've seen examples of, problems arising in this. But it just seems to me that maybe it's because they're flashy, but these bridges seem to be the things that get hacked the most, more than anything else. I'm just wondering, is there anything inherent to them that makes them hackable? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, so bridges are incredibly complex. So I'll just start with that. Anything that is highly complex means that there is a much larger attack surface. There's just more potential for errors. And at the same time, it also means that not very many people, it's hard to get a proper audit because it's not that many people who are able to effectively audit such a complex piece of software. A lot of people think bridging is one of the most complicated one of the most complicated use cases in the whole crypto sort of ecosystem. And just to compound the risk, a lot of these bridges are often connect to multiple different chains. So it's not just one smart contract for Ethereum to Matic. So for example, Sealer Network, which I believe is the largest bridge, it connects 23 blockchains now. And so these bridges, and again, bridging is incredibly new. So a lot of the hacks you've seen also have actually been blockchain development teams that created their own bridge. So Ronin, for example, Ronin is the Ronin bridge that got hacked for about $600 million. That was actually created by the Axie Infinity team itself. Which is kind of interesting. And similar with the Wormhole bridge, it was sort of built in conjunction with the Solana team. I don't think the Solana team actually built it itself. I believe Jump did, but they sort of helped them build it. What's interesting with Nomad is from what I can tell, it's one of the first sort of cross-chain bridges that isn't affiliated with any specific team that got hacked. It's like a bridging as a service type thing. Actually, now that I think about it, there was another one called AnySwap that also got hacked earlier last year. So it seems like every type of bridge gets hacked now I think about it, not just internal teams. But yeah, I think the key insight really is just bridging is one of the most complicated use cases. Vitalik actually wrote a long sort of article and research piece on this. And his thesis was that bridging was never really going to get that much more secure. It's just kind of inherently and somewhat insecure sort of operation. And so it's kind of like the main counter to the multi-chain thesis, because if bridging is really sort of scary and risky, it makes it really hard for there to be sort of a multitude of different blockchains existing. So
yeah, I'm trying to think of an analogy for it. It reminds me of there being different rail gauges for different blockchains, where basically we've got these switches to move from one rail gauge to another, but the trains are all moving at 100 miles an hour. So maybe sometimes, you can successfully swap from one gauge to another somehow and allow yourself to keep rolling along the track. But you're probably going to have a lot of derailments when that happens. And it just reminds me, and I think I don't know if it's the right analogy, but I think the idea basically is you got all these different blockchain platforms. They all have different, some of them programming languages, but also different technical specifications. And they're not like inherently interoperable. And this bridging seems like a kind of a stopgap solution. Or, I mean, if it has such a big attack surface and it is prone to so many errors and has so far not worked great, doesn't seem like a solution to me. So I'm wondering what is, like, how do we move assets? You described the thing it's trying to do is relatively simple, which is to move assets that are native to one chain onto another chain. Like, how are there other ways to do that?
Well, so this was one of the things that so bridging, like, you need a bridge to bring non-native assets from one chain to another.
Yeah.
There's no, like, bridging is the sort of, you inherently need a bridge. With that being said, you don't need a bridge for native assets. So for example, ETH is native to Ethereum. So that's the difference between something like that and USDC on Matic's actually not a good example, because I believe USDC has actually made like a Polygon or Matic native USDC. So it's not a good example, but Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And the reason why is you can't actually, it's essentially impossible. I mean, it's not impossible, but if native assets get hacked, if you had to, you could relaunch the chain. Like, there's all sorts of things you can kind of do. Whereas bridging, you're sort of, you're out of luck for non-native assets. So Vitalik's whole thing was that he still thought it was still going to be a multi-chain world. It was just that it would only be for chains that are large enough to have their own sort of native assets, in which case you wouldn't need bridging, which is actually quite an interesting take. So he's sort of long multi-chain but short bridges, to sort of summarize. With that being said, though, I think bridging, like most new layer ones or layer twos and all these different things, they require, like, most of their TVL is non-native assets. Like, for the most part, everyone uses USDC, and USDC is only native to a couple chains. So for the most part, people require bridging for the vast majority of their assets. And I think we're just early, to be honest with you. Like, it's really, really early on in this. I think bridges will eventually get to the point where everyone feels very secure. A really big thing I think will happen is bridges will operate more like actual financial institutions, and they'll start having like T+3 sort of type settlement times. So they'll lower settlement times. Well, we're going backwards in time. They're gonna lower.
Yeah,
they're gonna.
What problem are we solving now with this? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Like, there needs to be settlement delays, essentially. Like, it needs to be time delayed, so that like, if there's an exploit, not 100% of the assets can be lost right away, right? So whether that means like withdrawal limits, or just time delays in terms of how things settle, that obviously makes the user experience worse, but would provide protection.
Yeah, interesting. So what we really need are centralized intermediaries who can slow down the pace of finance to 3-day settlement periods for financial transactions. Oh, wait.
Yeah. Well, they don't need to be central. They can still be decentralized, but maybe add some time. Yeah, it would just be like a decentralized. It's kind of going back in time. Maybe not 3 days.
Yeah, where everyone realizes this is all just not going to work and everything just moves back to Ethereum, or there's some other solution where we're not using all these different chains. I mean, that's not my belief. Like, I think that you made the point, which is we're early, and you have to ask yourself, is this a reason why this is a bad idea and it won't ever work, or is it an implementation challenge to overcome? And I think that it's probably an implementation challenge to overcome, because the key thing here is that you've got demand from developers and users for block space. And what Anatoly said last time on the show, basically state, right? The ability to like lock in, state on the blockchain. And that's not going away. And you've got all these different protocols with different specifications, lots of innovation. So they should be encouraged and supported. And people will continue to do stuff on all of them. So long as there is demand for the underlying commodity and there's interest in innovating, then there's going to be lots of stuff on different chains. So we're going to need to solve the problem. Like that to me is sort of the key thing. We need to solve the problem. So how do we solve the problem? Not for me to decide. I'm not the person to do this, obviously. Maybe you, Andrew. I actually know you've developed your some bridges in the past. Is that wrong? No.
No, we use Sealer. So we actually initially built sort of like a multi-sig style bridge, similar to sort of chain bridge or kind of like the Ronin bridge. But for the most part, multi-sig bridges are sort of going out of fashion because people recognize that there's a lot of issues with them, both from centralization risks, but also just pure sort of hacking risk.
I only meant that you're knowledgeable about this stuff. Right?
Yeah, no. So what we actually did is we for SX Network we integrated Sealer. So see, I think that's going to be the next big thing. I don't think it makes sense for teams to build their own bridging unless they're sort of experts in it, just given how complicated the sort of how complicated it is and how many sort of attack vectors there are. So I think that I'm very bullish on sort of bridging as a service providers. So things like Sealer. I mean, Nomad had just come out, actually. We actually looked at potentially integrating them too, but they had just launched sort of a couple months ago. So we wanted to, Sealer at this point has been sort of the longest, it's been in the market the longest without any issues. So it was sort of an easy choice for us. But I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity in sort of investing in the bridging as a service space. I think there'll be a couple sort of providers that emerge as the category leader that every new chain just sort of ends up adopting because it's the best. So, but still, it's going to be very messy getting there. We'll probably have a lot more hacks like this, which is sort of scary. And it does put a damper on sort of the cross-chain, multi-chain thesis, and it also makes it harder and harder for non-Ethereum chains to really get up and running. So, and especially with the merge coming, which is there's sort of two things as well, making new alternative layer ones less attractive. The first is Ethereum gas costs have dramatically fallen, which is great. Using the Ethereum network is actually affordable again. And then at the same time, we now have the merge coming up, which is expected to sort of lower costs even more potentially. So I'm curious, what do you think about the merge? I know you've been sort of following it. I'm curious, what are you? Do you think it's going to happen on time, the September 19th, or are you bullish on that, bearish on that? I'm curious what you think.
I think right now the options market is saying that a slight majority of wagers are that it won't happen on time. But you know, it's a pretty active market. I have no idea, honestly. Like, if history is any guide, it should tell us to be skeptical about these deadlines because it's been delayed many times, many Ethereum milestones. But you know, this year has given, I think, a lot of people a lot of confidence that maybe it can happen. I don't really know, but I do think that, assuming it does occur at some point in the next while, it is a very big milestone. And I think it is a huge leap forward for the Ethereum community and for the blockchain space as a whole. I mean, it's basically like trying to swap out, you know, the engines of a jetliner mid-flight over the Atlantic, right? Without disrupting the beverage cart or the in-flight entertainment system. Like, everything that's running on this network has to keep going seamlessly. And that's kind of a huge undertaking. So I really don't know. I do find it fascinating that you know, minor politics are really interesting. There was some stuff around, you know, Bitcoin with the you know, contentious period that it went through in 2016. That, you know, you got a lot of proof of work miners who are kind of, I don't know, upset that the chain is going to move to a proof of stake and that their whole business model is going to be obsolete pretty soon, right? You know, I don't really know how they're planning for that or what their role they're playing. I don't know enough about it, but it strikes me as one of those things where, you know, there's a talk right now of there being some kind of proof of work ETH not ETH Classic because that already exists, but ETH1 or some sort of other ETH that, you know, continues on the proof of work system that will keep running afterwards. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. The whole like there's going to be sort of two Ethereums, which is kind of interesting, and
Well, there already are two Ethereum. I mean, there aren't actually, but there is a thing, Ethereum Classic. Like there is
exactly
from the DAO hack, right?
I never understood Ethereum Classic. I thought that was like I couldn't believe that people actually sort of use that or like bought into that when there's no development activity on it. It doesn't make any sense. But I mean, crypto is the land of meme tokens, so I'm sure there'll be an Ethereum sort of proof of work chain, and everyone will just, most people I think will dump those tokens because they're useless, but I'm sure exchanges will list it and there'll be a couple copycats and nothing will ever get built on it. But
yeah,
I think
there'll be a couple of like, you know, thought threads on big brain threads on why ETH POW is the real Ethereum or something. But
yeah, I mean, it does go to show you how strong the Ethereum community is, that people are already sort of pre-announcing that they will dump any POW tokens that they get, Ethereum proof of work tokens they get. Regarding the merge, we have it
sort of,
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So on the merge though, just we actually have a prediction market on SX for whether the merge will happen by September 23rd. By September 23rd, and the plan date is, I believe, September 19th. So we just added a couple of days in case it gets delayed 1 or 2 days. And it's currently 60-40 yes, no. So the market puts a 60% chance that it will happen, which I actually think is way too high. I was sort of buying no shares because I think that's just, I don't know, just given historical track record, it seems unlikely. But so it is interesting that if you're saying the option markets are implying a 60-40 the other way, there's definitely some arbitrage available between sort of SX and these sort of option markets. But anyways, though, I still think the merge will happen this fall, whether it's delayed a month or two. I don't think we're not heading towards a sort of year or 2 years long delay. So I think that's going to be potentially the catalyst that actually gets us out of the crypto bear market.
Yeah.
I mean, my theory, which potentially could just be hopium, is that the run up in crypto was less dramatic than the run up in 2017 in sort of 2021. Ethereum ended up peaking around 5,000, which is about a 3 or 4x the previous cycle's highs, whereas prior cycles in the past, it's been like a 10 to 20x when you look at like Bitcoin and things like that. So I believe Bitcoin topped out at 69,000, which is only a 3x from 21,000 when it peaked in 2017. So with that being said, my sort of amateur opinion is that we're also going to get a less dramatic sort of bear market as well. I don't think we're headed towards sort of a multi 2 to 3 year bear market like we have in the past. And I agree with you. For the most part, I think we've mostly reached either the bottom or close to it. And talking to people, I know a lot of people right now are accumulating every time ETH goes below 1,500 because they just think it's an incredible sort of opportunity.
Yeah. Well, just to wrap up on the market side, I mean, we've seen a lot of bad news hit the market and a lot of forced sellers and a lot of, I guess, sort of fun and real issues that have hit. And I think that's slowing down a lot. I mean, it's, deleveraging can take a bit longer, but I think the worst of that is behind us. And then you look at the funding cycle, we see more and more VC rounds getting closed, huge amounts of money sitting on the sidelines. The value of stable coins, the ratio of stable coins to other crypto assets is near an all-time high. So there's just clearly a lot of dry powder sitting on the sidelines, including a lot of VC dollars, which I think puts the bid under the sort of junior end of this market. And then the global macro side is that, you've seen the Fed pivot and maybe a turn towards a slightly more dovish stance. Doesn't mean that they're not going to keep hiking, but even like a second derivative change of like a slowdown to the rate of hiking, I think is going to put a huge bid in the market. I mean, stocks had their best I think it was something like one of their 5 best months in the last 30 years in July, right? And crypto is off the bottom pretty significantly. I mean, we lose sight of this, but Ethereum is like 60, 70% off its low from the summertime. Like it was below $1,000 very briefly there. And it's at like 1670 right now, so like it's obviously caught a bid. Doesn't feel like a dead cat bounce. You never know. Maybe we retest, but I told Bloomberg recently that, whether you think it retests the lows or not, like if your target on Ethereum is $10,000 in the next cycle or $20,000, then buying at this 1600 or buying at 1100, I mean, sure, you'd love to time the bottom perfectly, but you're probably in a good place to accumulate, right? Not investment advice. It's just like read the tea leaves and see for yourself pretty much. I think that's good for today, Andrew. Great chat. Covered a few good topics. I think I understand bridges better than I did before. And, the talk around the merge, I think is probably going to be something we cover for the next little while here going into September. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you next week. Take care.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.